Hi, Kay. Welcome, everyone. This is our seventh class. Just reminding you on the fact that what is it? We'll meet next. What is it? We'll meet next week. Is to be the 18th, correct, or 17th, 18th? What is the? Let's look at calendar function for a second. Next week will be the 18th. We will not have class on the 25th because I'm going to be in Budapest, and we technically also won't have class on the 2nd because May 2nd. Come on, it's between the first, so that we have a break there, kind of, right? Therefore, we come back May 16th, and on what is it? May 16th, then May 23rd is 11th class. And on the 23rd, there's going to be a double class. 2 classes right after each other in the same room. We'll do it on the 23rd. Because why should I do it that way? Because I can do all the tools. Because I schedule 2 classes for tools of politics, where we go over the tools or instrumentations of politics using Lord's examination of. Okay, don't you love the advertising from Acrobat? You know, dun 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 dun, endless advertising. Go away, Acrobat! I don't care about you.
Sorry, could you repeat when we are going to have
the double session?
Yeah.
The double session are going to be happening on May 23rd.
Okay, thank you.
May 23rd, the Pools of Politics. Then, okay. Then we will then have. I think double session. Okay. On the. Then our next class after that, our last class will be double session because of the we can't have class on May 30th because of the holiday, right? I think May 30th is a holiday. Corpus Christi, I think it is this year. Because I know it was removed from the schedule. I noticed the thing of this, it's a holiday. My wife said, it's a holiday. Okay, it's a holiday, okay. So that means the next class after the May 23rd double session was June 6th. And the last class is June 13th, and the final exam is, I have to check. I don't think you have do you have exam on the 20th or 27th? Do you know yet? Do you guys have this is first year students, do you have a exam on this day, 27th or 26th? I have to go ask the office. Because I probably will like to do it on the 20th, but I could 22nd, the 20th, but I can move it to the 27th. Either or, give you, in other words, like that, because of the exam schedule week. Has everyone signed anyone not signed this? Okay, good. So therefore, that is the schedule of things. I'll send a little revised timetable. I got my notes, and I got my quizzes. Boy, I'm getting senile all the time, I'll just change the information because, I gave my other class, I instinctively just gave a piece of paper out to everyone, but it was the wrong one, the wrong sign-up sheets. I made my sample with both classes, and therefore I goofed and I gave you the other, I handed out automatically without looking at it, I handed out the sheet because it's the same thing. There's the class title is different, and then everyone signed up for the BA sent it on. So oops, I just changed the title. That's a fix. That's an easy fix. Okay, today's topic technically is going to continue from last week when we missed some things. And to be honest, the more I went over what I think what I did this semester with you guys, spending more time on the evolution of the state and going over more closely Boblett's thing that we did last week, right? was actually more useful. I mean, it was, because some semesters I do it, some semesters I don't. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. And the more I think about it, the more I like it. So I feel, because it actually helps, because I think people understood things better in that sense. I think they understood it well anyways, but it helped explain it and clarify things. And we saw the development things. But this led me to understate something that was founders, and that is the role. And actually, that's a big question, because what are founders? This would be in the week 6 thing, 5 and 6. Founders are basically what we call people who play the key role of a legislator, forming political systems, making systems, creators. And this may be not only about states themselves, creation of political communities themselves, right? But also people who change the regime or the form of the state. Therefore, there was changes to states, and that the people, they could be either a single individual or a group of individuals who play a key defining role. In the American case, the key principal moment would have been, let's say, the founding of the U.S. Constitution. So the role of the people who both at Philadelphia and who played a key principal role in the state ratifying conventions would be we call this whole generation in that sense, the key elites who played the role of defining the constitutional order, the founders, we call them, like the founders or the founding fathers, we'd say, right? But some places, like you can look at, let's say, creation of, let's say, 61, 62, France, when the crisis of the fourth regime, the Fourth Republic had its crisis, with the Algerian crisis and the crisis of Algiers. And we have to remember that Algeria, North Africa, was France. It wasn't a colony of France. It was a département of France. Okay? And what happened was that the Algerian nationalists pushed for independence, and de Gaulle gave it to them. And there was a problem with that, was because that a lot of significant part of France was very much invested in, particularly southern France, was very much invested in Algeria. And there was very much resistance, including a coup d'etat attempts against de Gaulle. But de Gaulle himself established a new government, okay? De Gaulle created what we call the Fifth Republic, which was a total revolution of the Fourth Republic into a much more centralized state, a state where the presidency had much more power. I think it was a 6-year presidency with the creation of the referendum, the presidency with the referendum, and the presidency had the power to dispatch. In other words, yes, they had a prime minister and legislative government, parliamentary structure, but the president had all the power. He could recognize a government, or if he didn't like a government, he could dissolve a government and force elections. And he could resign at any time, demand a new election. In other words, and what he would often do is blackmail. De Gaulle would operate by saying, I want something, here's a referendum. If you vote against it, I will resign. Okay, he would basically blackmail the population, and given his cult status and his role. So what did he do? He created a whole system of the administrative organizations and the centralization and bureaucratization of the system that defined the current model. Now, the current presidencies, ever since the reign of Jacques Chirac, they modified the French Constitution to reduce the time. I think it's to from a 6-year, I think it was 6-7-year presidency to like a 5-year presidency, or maybe 4 or 5-year presidency, and weakened the presidency a little bit. That was the change, because the big, it was under Mitterrand. Mitterrand was like very much the socialist Mitterrand, and who dominated French politics. Mitterrand shocked everyone. They thought the socialist Mitterrand was going to really alter the direction. And Mitterrand gets in power 78, 79. He wins two elections, and probably would have won the third. Mitterrand shocked everyone by not being pro-Soviet, being anti-Soviet. In fact, while the Germans government, even though the CDU government wasn't there responsible to trying to, we would see a CDU government which would be seen as a West German CDU government which would be seen as pro-NATO, but it was still accepting the SDP's, the Social Democratic Party's position on Ostpolitik, towards Russia. And therefore they were kind of more, didn't like the idea of the tactical nuclear buildup on cruise missiles and Persian IIs, in Persian II missiles, intermediate range nukes, to respond to the threat of Russian nuclear weapons. And there was a big anti-nuclear movement and protest all through Europe, except in France, socialist France. In fact, socialist France under Mitterrand did things like, you ever heard of Rainbow Warrior? What is Rainbow Warrior? Greenpeace, you ever heard of Greenpeace? They had a ship, Rainbow Warrior, which was trying to block nuclear. The French were engaging nuclear tests above underwater nuclear tests. And the Rainbow Warrior would go into the nuclear test zones trying to prevent the French the governments from engaging in nuclear tests, weapons, right? Anti-nuke movement. Well, guess what the French government did under Mitterrand? It sent the commando team to New Zealand, where the ship was located, and blew it up. And one of the people involved was the brother of what's her name? It was called, I forget her name. The one who ran for president about 8 years ago. The socialist, woman socialist. Major, I think it was Major, or she had this really weird military-sounding name. She was married to the she was married to the man who was the prime. Sarkozy. What? Sarkozy. Not Sarkozy. Not Sarkozy. After Sarkozy. Not Sarkozy. After Sarkozy, there was the guy. What's his name? Hollande. Hollande's wife, who ran against him. Her brother was one of the people arrested in the explosion of destruction of and killing 2 people of Rainbow Warrior. In fact, to get all 4 commandos back, 2 men and 2 women, the French government basically, using its power within the EEC, boycotted all New Zealand's lamb in the EEC. In other words, New Zealand was not allowed to sell lamb in the whole EEC, blocked it out as a weapon to get them to return the 4 captured French commandos that captured and tried for murder and destruction. The French had it, and it's a big debate. It's called Rainbow Warrior case, where it's called France versus New Zealand at the International Court. Famous case. Now, why do I talk about this? Come on, this is the French. We think the French are a bunch of pussies. No. The French are, come on, that's why I joke about this. The movie Le Femme Nikita, we call it Le Femme Nikita, right? That famous French movie about they get a female drugged out user, train her to be a high kick. That's what the French would do. The French secret services are still this way. They do ridiculous, extreme things, and they blame it on other people, and they usually recruit people. So therefore, there was a joke about these kind of things. Well, that's de Gaulle. De Gaulle created the security services. His action services were basically under the military, and that would go out and kill. If they had a terrorist group or organization operating against French interests, they would send action services to go eliminate them. Or kidnap, they knew you were an informer on that, they would simply kidnap you, torture you to get the information and do this. Now, there's a great classic movie to understand how this works, is watch the movie, it's called Day of the Jackal, the original Day of the Jackal. Don't go watch that crappy 1990s Day of the Jackal, because why? It's all, modern movies tend to fuck everything up. In a sense that they don't even understand the way the movie, the real operations of these moments, the attempt to kill de Gaulle. Now, this is a fiction story, but what happens with how the French government responds, how the security services. And you have to remember, France of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even 80s, and up into the early 90s, is not like our France today. It was the police used to carry machine guns. In Spain, France, Portugal, in the 70s, 80s, and here into the just in the 90s, they stopped. The gendarmerie and that would be armed to the teeth. In Spain, particularly, under Franco. But even after Franco, they were still heavily armed, the police, gendarmes. They were actually much more heavily armed than even the Polish militia. The Polish militia was actually hardly armed, pistols only, compared to the French gendarmerie with machine guns. And the British at this time, the same time the British had no guns. The British only get guns in the 1990s. Only special units get guns in England, even to this very day. Not every policeman in Europe gets guns. So again, the culture of each regime itself will change this. And I talked about some of the examples of the modern. So Con Lord's book talks about this and the Refounder. So I didn't want to talk about that only because I thought it was good. I mentioned last class the question of the regime or constitution. That the regime is the structure of the Constitution. We'd call this the Constitution in that sense. In the broader sense of the term, not there's two conceptions of a constitution. Again, deals with the functions of government, the structures of government, and the procedures of government. And this is what a constitution is. So it's not only, the problem is when we use today, we think constitution, we think of legal document, this piece of paper, legal document. But it's more than that. It is also the customs, the habits, the values, the structures, the way of life. The original word constitution, as it was used in the English, the original the pre-18th, 19th century use of the word, was your health, your character. In other words, you'd go every morning. Someone would go on a walk in the morning, the morning exercise, the morning activity. That's their constitutional. Okay, your constitution was your condition, your state. In that sense. So therefore, this is how I should understand the Constitution, how it's understood. But some people, this is why people don't like this word. This is in fact, the idea of this concept, this idea of a form or structure that shapes the government, that shapes the political order, that shapes the political system, this is what it is. In other words, the Greek word is always classical, from classic Greek is politeia. It has a double meaning in the Greek. It has the general form or the system, the political system, in that sense, right, of a community. Every given political community is going to have a kind of thing that defines it against how it runs versus how another one runs. So yes, the political form are the same. Each of them are political communities, but the direction and type of the community will differ based upon its form, right? So therefore, politeia meant in the Greek was the general form, but also it meant a specific type of politeia too. That was the double meaning of it. So therefore, it was the system, the form of a political community, the kind of type it is, right? Like animal species, right? You'd have a thing. It's like the word species, right? Species. Now, the funny part about the word politeia is that there's a politeia called politeia. It'd be like species called species. Imagine an animal species, that name was species, okay? And Aristotle uses this, but it's because the term politeia originally was used, and that is the problem, is the word how it was originally used, the archaic in the Greek. Because the politeia was opposed to basileus, king. In fact, kingship and political rule, and actually, if we look at the Latin also, the Latin is closest. The closest, while there's no exact term for politeia in the Latin, the closest one is res publica. And versus the difference is the rex, or the king, rex, and res publica. Royal rule and remember the name res publica. Let's look at the name. The res means thing. Publica means the public. So, in fact, by the way, your Polish word means the same thing. Take res polita, right? Res, thing, pol. What does pol mean in Polish? Juan, what is when you say po, what does that refer to?
Like pospolita is a common thing.
The common political thing or public thing. Polita publica, public thing. Common, the common. Common, shared, political, public thing. That's the difference between res. That's why you shouldn't translate. You shouldn't translate res publica public, because you have res public, right? You don't. Why did the Polish founders call it the res pospolita? Because they wanted commonwealth would probably be the better term in that sense, not republic. But you don't call. No one will not call yourself a commonwealth. Everyone calls yourself republic, even though the name isn't republic. So for this, I call this the translation problem. But back into this meaning, the Latin closest term to this means what? So therefore, the problem here is that the word, this idea of the politeo or the republic, but even the term republic can be a problem. Why? Because it itself became meaning to a specific. It had the same problem as politeo. When we think of what happens is the republic was seen as a type of form, right? A political form. Like a republic was seen as something. Originally, it just meant it was a political rule, not royal rule. Okay, that's the distinction between royal rule, which was hereditary rule based upon a family and a king whose personal ownership. It's patrimonial in the sense. I own it. It's mine. I'm the king. It's mine. Therefore, I'm the king. It's my property. You're my subjects. You're my. You don't have citizens in kingships. You have subjects. Right? There's no. A political community is where you have citizens. And what's a citizen again? A citizen is one who shares in rule. You're a co-participant, owner of it. Sharer of it. You are a participating ruler. So subject, in other words, when you have a political system where you're really subjects, to call yourself citizens is what? It's subversive. As Rousseau in the Social Contract says, well, people in France, the monarchy of France, call themselves citizens all the time, right? Citizen this. Well, don't they know they're committing, don't they understand when they use that term, they're committing treason? They're making a claim about something they have no right to make a claim towards? Because only the king is the thing, and you're a subject. A subject only obeys the law. And this is the problem with the concept of statecraft and state structures. State structures prefer, in other words, we render citizenship more as, this is the basic problem. The original conception of citizenship meant you were what? A ruler, a joint, we would call joint sovereign, a sharer of sovereign rule. What happened in Rome was citizenship became meaningless. In other words, all the power went to the emperor, all the power went to the king, and it became dynastic, right? It became dynastic within a family, within a household, or within a group of competing families. So it no longer became something the people controlled, but rather there was a ruler, and therefore citizenship as citizenship lost its meaning. So what does citizenship became? Citizenship became merely a holder of certain privileges and rights. So therefore, and this is the change in the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire went from, in fact, there's a very good, nice textbook about this by Helen, is it Helen? Helen Mershcombe Wood. I think it's Helen. It's called From Citizens to Lords. Because what a Roman citizen was, that meant you had certain privileges. You couldn't be merely crucified. You could appeal to Caesar. You had certain rights and privileges like this. And therefore, citizenship basically meant that you had certain privileges or immunities. That's why the English word in language in Latin law is privileges and the law in the common law, the Latin or the older Latin things, where there were privileges and immunities. And privileges understood as rights, and immunities were, in other words, immunity is things that you're immune to. These are negative rights. In other words, the king or the crown could not do this against you. Limited. And the other one is positive rights. privileges that the crown gives to you, right? Privileges are things that you did not have that the king gives you. Immunities meant that the king could not interfere with something that you possessed. Now, why I'm talking about this way? Because you have to understand that this is the change, the division between the political and the royal is also why Machiavelli why does Machiavelli in his classic little book Prince, why does he call it Prince and not Rex? Why does he choose the word? The title is in Latin, Principatus. Why does he de Principatus? Why does he choose the Prince? Why wouldn't he choose the Rex? De Rex. Wouldn't it be better? Because everyone wanted to be king, right? Why not Rex? That choice is very telling in the Roman model, because the Romans had a taboo against king. The Roman Republica had therefore Machiavelli's choice, in fact, that's the whole coining of what that term means, Principatus. It was the term coined by Octavius, or by this time Augustus, to kind of define his role as not as an emperor, not as a king, because then if he was king, maybe he'd suffer the same fate as Julius. Because remember, why did they kill Julius? Because they thought he was going to call himself king. And what could every Roman do? Kill the king. Every loyal Roman took an oath, and that every Roman identity is that anyone who would be a king or give Rome a king shall die. The greatest taboo in Rome after the rape of Lucretia and its republican identity. And the role of Brutus in establishing the First Republic, why Brutus was necessary in the conspiracy to kill Caesar. Why did the conspirators drag in this Brutus, who was a friend of Caesar, to the conspiracy? And if you understand that, this would have been more interesting last month when we had 15th of March, right? The Ides of March. But this is important to understand. That why does he use the term? And therefore, this is the problem of Republica. This is why Republic is Respublica as the term. And Politeia also becomes the specific type of regime, right? It becomes a problem. Is it referring to, and this is why the term republic is not even liked as the term to call this regime. So this is why we have a problem about this. The constitutional form, the Politeia. Now, the Politeia is therefore the public ordering of who, how, and why of who governs. Who, how, and why. As well as the way which they govern and the ends or goals which their government styles and the forms strive to obtain. So therefore this concept, Politeia or regime or constitution, defines all these principles, the fundamental ordering of a political community, in terms of who, how, why, who governs, as well as this. Therefore, the Politeia, how we want to define it, will reflect the authoritative or ruling part of a political community. Its ruling part, literally the potuma, the Greek word is potuma, that is the part that is ruling. So in a regime there will be a potuma. Potuma and a regime are kind of almost synonymous terms, but they're not. They're different things. One is the system, and this is the actual part or body that's ruling. That's controlling or ruling. But this governing body or potuma, right, is nevertheless part of a whole. Now, the big difference between ancient and modern political systems is this. Modern political systems are what? Unitary. That, in other words, that the ruling part is merely a representative agent out of the whole. Okay? And the ancient model is the opposite. It's the part that has power. A part or a segment of the given community, that part that has the power and the rule. It's not necessarily representative. In other words, every part, a part in every political system, part of that system, part of that community is going to have the ability to control or exercise authority over the whole. Whereas the modern state, that authority is representative of the whole. The creation of the unitary. Remember the structure of the logic of the modern system. It's a unit. In other words, the body politic, the political community forms by the members all willing it to be, right? So therefore, you have a general will. You have a general this creation of this unitary sovereign entity by the act of our willing creation. And like anything willing, it's unitary. Because it is a product of will. You create it, and therefore it has that. And the government is merely the thing that this will establishes to rule it. Okay, that's the modern way of doing it. In other words, the individuals collect together. They general will like this, and the general will. This is most clearly, if you look at Rousseau's social contract. He in the second book of it, this was where he clearly explains how this process works. In other words, the general will, the collective will, creates a constitutional order, and then in that constitutional order, it establishes the government. That's the modern form. And the government is thus a representation, agent representing. That's even Hobbes. Hobbes' king is not a sovereign in the true sense, but a representative agent of the sovereign. And what is the sovereign? The sovereign is the collected will of all the members of the body politic that creates, in other words, all the constituting parts, all the wills, it's called in the legal word is constitutive power. Who is the constituting power? It's the people and all their wills, the general will. That's how the will general in Rousseau, in French. So my elder teacher, counter Hobbes, contra the teachings of Hobbes in modern teaching that follows the understanding that the government represents the body politic, the whole body politic, and not merely a ruling part. The original ideas from Aristotle's pre-modern political science understands the nature of political rule as a part of the community that acts on behalf of the whole. And either for its own sake, its own interest, or for the interest of the common interest, common benefit. That's the famous division that we'll have in Aristotle's typology of political or constitutions or regimes. Will be, are governments ruling for their own benefit, or are they ruling for the benefit of the common benefit, common advantage, common benefit? Selfish interest, ruling for its own interest. This is usually seen as unjust. They're ruling at the expense against everyone. They're only ruling for their own interest. Therefore, they're acting more like a master. Remember master? Remember the mastery? What is master? Who benefits in the mastery? This master does, right? Political rule is supposed to aim at common benefit of all, both, common advantage. Interest needs to be of all the parties. Doesn't have to be perfectly. In other words, it doesn't have to be everyone get the same amount, but it has to be that the advantage must benefit all. It cannot. The rule or decision should not be benefiting one at the expense of another. Anytime a decision or an order benefits one at the expense of another, it threatens the order of the political community. In that classical sense. So therefore, this is why next time we meet, we'll talk about the classical model more in depth. Today we're going to be looking at the modern model. But this is why the Plotumata is structural way. And someone say, why am I talking about this? Because I think the Aristotelian model is more realistic than I would argue the Aristotelian political science is more realistic than our political science, the modern political science. Why? Because the modern political science assumes a unitary willing construction of rulership. That if we look at the real world, doesn't happen like that. In other words, the idea is that and we know this problem. Why? Because it's a problem in modern political science. They talk about the idea of elites. Why? Therefore, The nature of any large system is always going to be that there's going to be few people growing it. This is the problem. It's called it's called Robert Michels in his book on political parties comes up. It's called the Michels rule. It's of Michels and Omaska, called the Iron Law of Oligarchy. The larger the organization gets, larger a society or the organization get, for it to be effective and being able to do this, what ends up happening is that the people controlling and making decisions become ever increasingly fewer. So no matter how democratic an organization it is supposed to be, this, as it grows in size, the smaller the group will become. Also, Michels also noticed that these ruling elites will have more in common. In other words, in these large systems, the representatives chosen to be representatives of the larger groups, the people who are chosen as representatives will eventually become the new elites, and the elites will have more in common with each other than who they're supposed to be representing. Therefore, the system creates a problem. Even though it's supposed to be representative, the nature of a large-scale representation, where the situation of this, that these few people representing, well, all of a sudden what they'll do, they'll intermarry each other, they'll work. In other words, just go look at who are the leaders of political parties and who are selected as members of parliament in Congress and that. And then look at who they marry and who they go to school with. They will marry and connect it with the interest of big business, big corporations, big media. They're all interconnected. They share same interests. They create a common elite that no longer has anything in common with the people they're supposed to represent. This is the danger of large systems. This is why Montesquieu argued that you cannot have a free society. Large republics it's impossible to have a republic, which means self-government, popular self-government, in large systems. Because why? Because and this is something that even Rousseau points out in his social contract, the famous problem of the relative power of any individual. The relative power of any individual is the famous equation: 1 divided you 1, divided by the total number of political actors in the system. That's the total number of voters. And therefore, if the system has 20 million voters, 1 to 20 million, that's your power. That's your relative power. If the situation in a smaller scale model where you had 1 to 100,000, who has more power? 1 to 100,000 or 1 to 250 million? You see the problem? So in the changing of American population in the last decade of 100 million more people, what have you done to the average relative power of every American citizen? You diminished it by 100 million. You see what have you done? And if you feel this way, again, you're feeling this. This is how every individual will feel this. You will feel less and less power. Therefore, you will feel what? More threatened by the system. And more the system will, and as the system grows bigger and bigger, that means not only the relative sense of power, but the reality of less and less control over it. And those who control you have less and less in common with you. This is the kind of psychological problem that happens by perception of power, and the nature of these large systems. So therefore, what is the big problem here? This goes, well, what about this? How do we understand the structural things? Every part in every situation is going to be divided in parts. Every political community, any political system is going to have a constitution of parts. And every part is going to have what? Its own interests. So therefore, this idea of the classic model is that a certain part will gain control because of its power, relative power to the other ones. Either its size, or its ability, or its wealth, or its power. That relative, something it has gives it power. And that this power over the others will allow them, the others will say, oh no, their advantage. Okay, why do you let people rule you? You let people rule you if you're benefiting you. Or they're able to rule. They're able to, in other words, most people don't, I hate to say this, most of people can't be bothered to go vote. Most people can't be bothered to do the necessary day-to-day chores that political rule requires of you. You have better things to do. You understand? So therefore, therefore the funny thing is, those who become political are usually self-selecting groups. A certain type of personality, of people with a certain types of behavior, usually sociopaths, vanity, high levels of vanity. They call them the dark triaders. These people tend to put themselves forward as leaders. This is the problem of leadership in that sense. The people, all the things we look at, like sociopathy, narcissism, manipulation, calculation, all the three triad of the so-called dark triad in psychology terms. Okay, I'm going to shift because someone is louder than I am. This leads us to the problem of who gets selected as leaders, who puts themselves as leaders, who will become leaders. And the question of, okay, there's two ways you become leaders. You can buy, I can persuade you, or I can buy you, or I can coerce you. I can also persuade you honestly, or I can persuade you by lying, fraud. And how do you do this? Your interests. What is your interests, right? Every one of you have certain interests that you want. How do I get you to support me? As I lead, I will appeal to your interests. I always like to say this. Everyone talks about special interests, right? You hear this talk with this, oh my God, true democracy is destroyed by these special interests. Okay, right? You hear that talk all the time in life. What is special interests, usually? It's those people's interests. Their interests. Do you have interests also? Yeah. Well, why aren't your interests special? Well, they're not, because they're the right ones. Our own interests are perceived as the true interest, and other people's interests illegitimate. See how our brains work and how we privilege ourselves at the expense of the other interest. Now, ourselves can be defined by our groups, or there's many ways we define ourselves. Either by our family, our clan, our structure, our economy status, our population or identity, or we can create, human beings also create artificial constructions of identity. Why? Because we have imagination and we can do that. We can live in our imagination. But the problem with this is that imaginary identities, will clash with concrete natural identities. And the sad part is nature always wins over imagination. In other words, I don't know about you, you will die. You will all age. You may we might be able to slow the aging process down, but we are mortals and we will die. You will get sick. All of you, by the way, the longer you get, the longer your life will be, the more likely you'll die of cancer. Why? What is cancer? Cancer is nothing but dead cells. So what happens? If you know anything about biology and replication of genes, why do we age? We age because the replication process is always going to have errors in it. And over time, the numbers of error sequences in replication of the mitosis process in our genetics. Remember, we don't contain the same genes we do in 72. In 72 hours, our genes have, the total number of genetic compounds have totally been changed and gone through each other, body. And was it within so many months, even our material matter is not the same material matter that we had over time? our skin falls off, our new skin creates. In other words, our physical body alters. The matter of our body is not the same matter that it was. It may look that way, but it's changed. And what's happening in the changing process? Every time there's replication, there's probability of errors, and as the errors increase, cancers emerge, sicknesses emerge, issues emerge. And this is the way, and therefore anything as it develops will be mortal and die. So therefore you have different groups. What are the three major parts? Well, the wealthy. You can understand this. This is the famous class distinction. Wealthy, those, in fact, this is the big distinction. Wealthy, poor, and middling, or mesos. Now, mesos is the middling. What does this mean? This means enough. You have enough. In fact, the joke about wealthy and poor is all around a certain word, poros, in the Greek. Poros means means. Means, the means to live, to sustain yourself, to survive. And the difference between the wealthy and the poor is basically what? The poor is aprios, alpha privative, without means. Those who lack or don't have the means to survive. And then what is the tool of capital that every individual can? Capital is the mechanisms of how we survive. It's the economic term. Mechanism of how do we produce our activity. What does almost every healthy individual, what is the form of capital that every single healthy individual has? Come on, what is the form of capital? Capital accumulation, that allows us to make wealth, make things, to produce stuff. It's not land, because land or material land is, and not everyone will have it.
People,
what?
Workers.
Okay, what do you call that? Yes, people,
Human
but
capital.
no. Come on, what is more specific?
Laborers.
Labor.
Yeah.
Labor. The ability to work. Yeah. Does every human being have the ability to work? No. Mentally retarded people, not physically disabled, the very young, the very old. In other words, not every individual is going to have the equal capacity to work and labor. Even though all human beings have potential for labor, it's going to be on a nice distribution curve between those who have more and those who have less. And therefore there's going to be what? Distributions of, and also what else? You have mental labor, physical labor, but also what other kind of labor? Labor has two components. Physical labor, and then what is the other kind of labor? Intellectual labor, thinking. Does everyone have the same mental capacity to think and make judgments? No. So what's going to happen to the distribution of the ability to produce and be effective with your intellectual capital? There's going to be a distribution curve again. Those who are middle of the road, those who have the median position versus those who have higher and those who have lower. So what's going to happen is you're going to have a distribution of both physical and mental capital. This is why anyone who says all men are created equal is telling you a lie. Because, I'm sorry, no, you're not. There's going to be some who have more, some who have less. It's the nature of the system. Now, political equality is not meant to mean that everyone's going to be the same. It means you're only equal under the law. You'll be treated equally. No person will be treated under the law. This is what equality means in the political sense, is that everyone's vote and everyone's thing should be the same, and everyone should be treated the same under the law. Not that everyone should be equal in terms of their wealth or their power. That is never going to be obtained. And any attempt to do that will just give power, it's transferring power to another group of few people. Okay? In other words, any attempt to control power will never distribute power down. It will only distribute power among the different elites and different power holders, or create a new power elite that will then control it. And by the way, what will make that elite any more humane than the other one? You don't have, you know, there's a famous saying, the devil you know is sometimes better than the devil you don't. So why am I going over this for is because this gives us the structure of regimes. Now, famous one is Aristotle's, Aristotle's famous one, but also there's the sequences. Aristotle's one is the famous one. Common advantage, advantage of rulers, the type, this is that category, and then there's one, few, and many. I should go the other category. This is that famous category. I'll talk about it in a second. And this is from the Republic. The Republic was done first. Republic in Publius has a circle of regimes. It's a cycle. The best city, which is aristocratic or monarchical, goes that to a timocracy, honor city, oligarchy, democracy, tyranny, and then tyranny to kingdom. Cycle. And this is Polybius, right? Polybius, it goes very interesting. Polybius goes from monarchy to tyranny, tyranny to aristocracy, aristocracy to oligarchy. In other words, it goes from few to many. It goes from one, few, many back to one again. Okay, and it's like this. And it usually is what happens is the switch of the one. Polybius has the switch like this. Therefore, it's a cycle. It's a circle. And there's a word for this. This is where the word revolution really comes from. This circle, because what does revolution mean? The word a circle, right? Revolve. Autoculus. This is autoculus. But we don't mean this. We mean this. When I talk about change, we'll talk about change. Now, let's go over here. This is the famous is Aristotle's typology, the famous one. Here, the qualitative claim. One, few, many. The quantitative, number. Quantity means number, right? Always remember, quantity always means number. So the qualitative claim, it means the quality. The quantitative claims means the number. One, few, and many. And the other one, the qualitative claim, is whether what? The quality of the regimes, which is common advantage, common good, common benefit, or ruler's advantage or ruler's benefit, right? That's usually understood as the question of justice. How is it more despotic? Will it have to, when the government is ruling for its own advantage and not your expenses, when the situation is, the system is ruling for the advantage of the ruler or their friends, how cooperative will the society be towards having their money taken away from them? How would you willingly give the government money knowing that it's only would you willingly give away or give to the rulers your wealth and your labor and your capital and your money if it's only going to benefit them and their friends? So they would have to use what to do it? Coercion, right? So therefore, therefore what happens? When you know you're benefiting, are you going to be more willing or less willing to give things freely, willingly? If you know that you are going to benefit also, you would be more willing to give it, right? So therefore in a republic that is governed properly, citizens would gladly give money for the public, the benefit, the good, because they know they're going to get it back. They're going to build schools. They're going to give money to schools. Therefore, what kind of, by the way, therefore, how should taxes be? If you're going to have a situation where everyone is going to benefit towards it, therefore, how should taxes be? Equal or proportional. In other words, Therefore, if everyone's benefiting, if you're benefiting, you better pay into it proportionally to the amount that you're benefiting from. If you make the rich pay more than the poor, and the poor are going to benefit more from the policy than the rich, is that policy just? No. Why? Because you're benefiting from something you're not contributing to. You see the problem there? By the way, does anyone really want, this is the funny thing, do people really want justice? Do you really want what you deserve? We rather want what we want, not what we deserve or merit. Therefore, we often will choose injustice rather than justice. Therefore, if you're poor, you want the rich to pay more. If you're rich, you don't want to pay anything, but you don't want to give any. Therefore, you don't want to give anything. But both the rich and the poor don't want to give everything. They're very similar in this way. The only reason why policies that will convince the many to support, if everyone had to pay the same amount, trust me, nobody would pursue policies of any government policies. You wouldn't want roads, you wouldn't want anything. You'd have to force people to do roads. And therefore public spending would be very much a debate. You didn't want too much government. You'd want government to find money outside of taxing. Okay? This is the nature of the problem of this. Therefore, if you can create a situation where the rich pay and the poor benefits, oh, this is great because there's more poor people than rich people, so we can just force them. We outnumber you, so pay. Then what does the rich do? The rich resents this, and therefore what do? They will find ways to attack the poor. And by the way, them being few, therefore, remember the problem of the large system. Once you have a large system, the few are going to get control of the system. Therefore, the few who are ruling will look at the few who are like the rich and they'll say, we're like them. Oh, let's be their friends. And what happens is, therefore, they ends up any kind of large system will always start to what benefit the few at the expense of the many. The few and their friends. This is the irony about this. This is why the situation of here. But this is the classic type of regime structure. One common advantage, kingship. One ruler's advantage, tyranny. Few, common advantage, aristocracy. Few, a common advantage, oligarchy. Many, common advantage. This is Aristotle's called politeia. The regime called regime. And this becomes a big interpretive problem in Aristotle because this is I'm not going to get to it. But the many here, this is why in Polybius distinguishes, he puts democracy over here, the good regime. Aristotle and Plato put democracy as bad regime. Because the many will always pursue their own interests at the expense. Now, but Polybius will change this, and Polybius changes this by this word. He will choose the word democracy as this is the good one. And holocracy, holoch means mob. The rule of the mob. Now we won't go on this. Here's the famous I'm not going to, no. This goes all the way back to week 2 or 3 about the society versus state. Society and state and the connection between it, the modern system. We have a problem. The problem is that our modern political form, today's topic is supposed to be modern regimes. Modern regimes all operate in the state. It's a unitary structure. So it has, what is the state? Remember the logic of the state, and the equation of that is Gemeinschaft for society, right? Remember, it's artificial. The society of Gemeinschaft is artificial, created what is needed, based on consent, higher degree of voluntary creation, arises out of rational intentionality. It rests on rationality and legal law and legality. Durkheim argues that it emerges by the division of labor. In other words, the interconnectivity, the division of labor and the division of interconnection. The division of labor, therefore, in a large-scale organization, different parts will do different services, and therefore they will, in order for the system to work, they will interconnect, and their interlocking interests and ability to meet each other's interests creates the larger-scale network. So instead of living together, instead of sharing a common life together, which was koinonia, what holds you together is the different functioning of interests and how they interlock and interdependency of their interests creates the need to create a common larger scale network. This is society. The state, a body frames by a society. It has no natural limit, either to size or territory, population as construct. So in other words, society also has no limit. The limit of society is merely the interconnecting interests that link the system of interests together. In other words, the shared interests and the shared interconnected logic that keeps the whole system working. Society is not a construct of a particular place. So the state has no limit too, because it's a product. It's limitless because it's a product of willing agents and their consent. So there's no natural limit. It's either in terms of territory or population. Because why? As a construct of human making, it rests on the consent of the constituting parts. It's a unitary construction via a willing social agreement or social contract, which generates a union that all submit to and agree by. It again rises out of rational intentionality and rests on there's a law. Now this is why I take you to this part. State and society. They're Siamese twins. They're both bound, created at the same time by the same entity, individual agents and individual willing agents. So therefore, the anthropology of the modern political theory rests on the willing individual, the idea of the autonomous atom, the autonomous agent, willing agency. That every individual agency will, therefore they create both state and society, and therefore they're both the same, they're both constituted from the same moment of willing creation. The difference is, there's a difference. They're identical and they're kind of Siamese and they're connected, but they're not perfectly connected. There is a distinction. In fact, the problem is with Hobbes. The early thinkers, Hobbes, he fears society a little bit. He looks at society and thinks, well, this can limit state. In other words, Hobbes argues we don't want the biggest problem in the medieval world is competing claims of authority. By the way, if society and the state are not created from the same body, aren't they therefore that you don't have competing claims because they rest upon the authority of the same body. But wait a minute, the purposes are different. You see the problem there? So you have the same source, they're constituted from the same source, but they have two different purposes. So who should have authority over whom? Should the state, because you have two equal claims. This leads us to the same identical problem Hobbes was trying to avoid. The medieval problem of the two claims of church and state. In other words, the medieval problem is you have all these competing sources of authority. Who should be authoritative? The solution was, let's create the state. Everyone has one form. That only the state has legitimate form. So that Hobbes agrees with the Westphalian solution. But then his own model creates the logic of his own model creates the same problem. And therefore he says, I'm going to ignore the society. In his treatment in Leviathan, he completely ignores the problem of society. In fact, even Halak kind of ignores it too. The chapter on civil society ends up becoming a chapter, this is one of the most annoying parts. Try finding a clear discussion what the F civil society is, and Locke or Hobbes, and you'll be scratching your head. Why? Because it's in the chapter on civil society in Locke, in second treatise of government, it's all about conjugal society, about men and women conjugating to have sex to form children, right? Conjugal society. But even that doesn't form civil society in that sense. You get no clear, in other words, in both Hobbes and Locke, civil society and state are almost synonymous concepts. Therefore, what is society in relationship to the state? This is the problem. And in modern liberal theory, starting with Montesquieu, starts out we need to have a division between state and society. One of the biggest criticisms of what we so-called totalitarianism is that there's no distinction by state and society. If the state totally subsumes this, in other words, the liberal position opposes total political control over the social. This is why, ironically, feminism is the opposite. In other words, feminism takes the same logic against it. The idea is that the personal is the political, and therefore it creates the inverse problem. By taking the personal and making it the political, it totalitizes the personal as the political, and therefore eliminates the division between political and social. This is why feminism is anti-liberal, because its very premise on the theory of feminists, particularly second wave feminist ideas. I mean, what do we mean by second wave? We usually, because there's two different understandings. If you understand the original suffragettes as first wave, which people don't, the reality suffragettes are considered before feminists, and therefore they say first wave feminist is post-suffragette. There's two ways to understand first and second feminism in this way. Feminism is a post-suffragette environment. But if we understand first as being suffragette, it's second generation, or if it's not second, but in post-feminist theory, feminist second generation or first feminist generation, particularly those of the 1960s, emerge with the concept of the personal as the political. And this idea emerges the private and the public in a way that the liberal world wanted to prevent. Liberalism sought to put divisions, to give some protection of the political, in other words, to separate a realm, in other words, the political realm of political authority should not have total interaction and jurisdiction over our lives. Therefore, the public and the private, right? The public and the private should be distinctive. That the public is the political, and the private, the social, should be. But the problem with the social is, in the ancient world, the social was as public as private. In other words, the social realm in the ancient world, or the closest thing of koinonia, what we would consider social behavior in the modern world would be considered political behavior in the old world. Because it's public. Everything public was political in the ancient world. Only the household, in the private realm within the household, this was outside the scope of the public. Everything outside of the household was public. The market and everything outside of the immediate square of the oikos, the household, or the estate. That was the ancient model. Our model is more radical. We say every individual is the private. And becomes what? There becomes the next problem. It becomes the social becomes the private here is here. The social now is the interconnection of that, the non-governmental scope. In other words, the outside of it's my interrelation with others. These are my private and immediate interrelations with others. This becomes the social. And then my interrelation with power becomes political. So therefore, this dual sphere of state and society becomes the problem in modern thinking. Whereas if the state and society are like this, overlapping completely, this is not a free, liberal theory looks at this as a totalitarian society, a closed society. Using the language of Karl Popper, open versus closed. Karl Popper's famous open society versus closed society. Well, what is open society? That's liberal society, where there is pluralism. Where there is, what does pluralism means? It's a multiplicity of private interests that are operating in a realm of social outside the scope of state authority. A closed system is, no plurality. It's uniformity. In other words, ironically, the closed society looks like a small town. In fact, that's the big problem. That's one of the biases in that whole Karl Popper's metaphor of open versus closed, is really the difference between what is natural for a small community is not natural for a large urban area. Therefore, he privileged, of course, because Popper being being from Vienna, being part Jewish, and therefore part of the urban intellectual elites of that kind of urbanized population, has a bias towards the urban. So he looks at the urban landscape, which is this large, homogeneous position of individuals, versus a more civic understanding of rural communities, small town. So a small village is restrictive, closed, but you have identity, you have protection. Whereas in a big city, you're isolated, you're alone. You're free, but you're alone and isolated. That's the problem. This is the dual problem of this. And he therefore calls this open and this closed. See the trick? That's a linguistic trick. He just demonized the small communities. The ancient order, the ancient political communities now, therefore Plato and anyone who argues for the classical conception of koinonia is a totalitarian. Anyone who speaks of the benefit of longing for communities, we have this. We have a longing for our memories to be part of local communities. It's natural for us. We want to be part of a family. We want to be part of a network. We want to have kin relations. We want to have intersections of friends and social relations. Therefore, our longing for connectivity. But in a large-scale social network, that's not possible. It's only artificially reproduced. By what? By shared interests. And by the way, our shared interests going to be always the same over time? No. Shared interests will constantly change based on situation. So how stable are you going to be? In other words, in a large-scale society, every individual is constantly, if they don't have a stable shared, if they're not participating in the system of shared interest, they have no security. So what happens if you're no longer useful to the system? What happens when you cease to be useful within the structure of division of labor? What is protecting you now? What is supporting you? Nothing. No community, everything that was there before. Family, class, social network, guild. The new system destroyed. Why? To create more effective systems of interconnection. So what happens when the structure you no longer fit in it? All the intermediating structures are gone. Church, family, class, kin group. So what happens to you? Come on, what happens to a person who becomes isolated? Durkheim called it atomy, right? Atomy, this isolation, this sense of isolation. What happens to people who become isolated? They start self-harming, either through drugs or social manipulation and psychosis activities. They engage in, if the system is smart, what does it do? Brave New World it. give you drugs, make sure you're drugged, and make sure and create new problems, create new fantasies and illusions that you participate in, so therefore you won't become angry and you won't cause revolution. Hence why gender stuff. Come on. Gender is the perfect tool of the system to create people to engage in themselves and in a self-castrating, self-destructive system that you become ultimately in the long term powerless to resist the system. But ironically, at the same time, it created a powerful interest that could be manipulated by those to use as a tool of attacking anyone who challenges the system. So this is how you can understand these structures of behaviors. So let's look at this in terms of this problem. Here's the modern systems. The modern systems of this divides it into two. The classical understanding, the regimes had a strict structure or a complex structure based on claim. We'll talk about this more next week. But here the modern concept divides, first Machiavelli's famous one, republics versus principalities. And Durkheim follows Montesquieu follows Mr. Machiavelli by arguing for republics, and republics have two forms, either aristocratic and democratic, aristocratic, oligarchic, and democratic republics, and then monarchies and despotisms. So republics and principalities, Montesquieu's republics, monarchies, and despotisms, and that's very interesting. Notice that what happens with Machiavelli? Tyranny disappears, right? The classical model you had back there was you had one, few, many, good and bad, and tyranny is like the opposite of kingship, right? Tyranny disappears in Machiavelli. Montesquieu, tyranny comes back, but it reframes itself in terms of despotism. Despotism is that, in other words, it's the idea of despotic states replaces tyranny. Now, what's interesting with Tocqueville, he goes, there's only two systems. Because he says what's happened is history has the tendencies of monarchies and aristocratic republics are once we have the democratic revolution, only democracy is valuable. In our world, in other words, historical circumstances has changed the situation, and nothing but democracy is legitimate. And every system that exists wants to claim legitimacy will call itself democracy, even if it's not. Because only democracy is legitimate. Everything else is despotic. Okay? This is the post-Tocquevillian universe. Now Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, etc., will instead focus on number, one, few, and many. One, few, and many. Therefore, it's kingship, aristocracy, democracy. And by the way, what is tyranny? Tyranny is this kingship misliked. If you don't like it, what is oligarchy? It's aristocracy. If you don't like rule of the people, it's mob rule. In other words, you have kingship, one, few, and many. That's the structure of political rule. And if you don't like it, you call it another name. It's rule misliked. It's not that this is a real thing. It's only that you don't like it. It's like I joke about special interests. Special interests are those other guys' interests. Bad rule. Democracy is when it's bad. If you don't like the people, when the many are ruling, you don't like the many, what they're doing, that's mob rule. Oh, populism. This is the new dirty word. Populism. What is this? Populism. Populism is this new word that's dangerous. Oh, he's a populist. This is linguistic control to fool the many. I'm sorry. Most of you are basically easily manipulated. Will be easily. Most of human society is easily manipulated by media messages and consumptions. Since you don't spend time thinking about it or reflecting on it, if you don't spend time thinking about it, you're just going to pick the easiest thing and reflect. Monkey see, monkey do, right? You just reflect on what does everyone else say. We're group animals. We want to fit in the group. So whatever group we're in and whatever they think, we think like them. Because what there's social cost of being excluded. So you want to be liked by the group, so you think with the group. Ironically, because of mass communication, and because most of you are using your phones and talking like this, you're easily manipulated. Because it only takes, Twitter and TikTok, only 3% of the population controlled by whoever controls the algorithm convinces you that is what everyone really thinks. In other words, the natural organic structure of a community would actually be the majority of people in that society thinks it that way. But living in an artificial network that's controlled by an algorithm which is controlled by either a handful of individuals, they can control your perception of what you think the noise signals. In other words, in a real lived community, you will see the noise signals. You're 500, 700 people, 1,000 people, that you would know either firsthand or secondhand. You will know what the majority actually thinks. You will actually experience it, input directly through your immediate sense experience. Internet information, you're intervening it through a medium device that is controlled by an algorithm that's controlled by individuals. So if you're basing your information by that, you have to be, particularly if you use social media, you shouldn't use social media, you should use anti-social media. So that you can find out, go to the dark web, go to the sources like this, go to intermediate sources so you can get. The problem with this is that if you have to do it that way, you have to do a lot of work. To really sort through the old internet, you had to search thousands of items every day to find something. Hate to say it, the internet, most of the internet world is crap. Only 1% or less is good information. So unless you're willing to do the work of sorting through the 99% of crap, being able to find what is the useful information and have the judgment to know what's useful and not useful. Social media, most people are being creatures of lazy. Come on, we all are lazy in a sense. So therefore we pick that social media offered us an easy mechanism to sort out information, sort things, to find relative information that we find useful. Therefore, oh my God, it's useful, so I might as well believe it. If it's being useful for economic reasons, it must be also useful for these reasons. Not necessarily so, but that's the reality. So one, few, many, liked or not liked. I'm going to skip this. This is the famous types of government, but I'm not going to talk about it. We'll talk about this one. This is Samuel Feiner's thing. We'll talk about Samuel Feiner. We'll talk about one of the readings we read is from Tilley's book, Regimes and Repertoires. That's going to be probably this week's reading. There was chapter 1 and 2 in that. Phil uses this. Now, his conception here is this fourfold understanding of network, of his regime typology. Palace, which means elites, and the forum, the public sphere. Elites, in other words, palace is where there's a system of, and by the way, this is online, it's in the classroom, you can go check the PDFs are there, there in the campus system. So the Samuel Feiner's idea is the palace is a situation of elites, and forum is the place where the public are, right? The opposite sphere is church, therefore, which means there's either a nobility. This is the sacred versus the secular. Don't confuse yourself. Social justice is a religion. Gender studies is a religion. Ideology is a religion. So in other words, your systems that require belief versus nobility, this is economic status, class status. So religiosity or ideology, if ideology matters, then this is more church. So if you're concerned about social justice, gender, or things like that, you are in the sphere of the church, in Feiner's model. If you're interested in class, status, you're interested in nobility. You're in the nobility model. Palace is therefore the high point of the elites ruling it, And noforum is when it's more popular. So these are the and therefore there can be what? Categories. There can be palace church, palace of nobility, church forum, nobility forum. These are the different types of political forms. So you have hybrids. You have the pure type, and then you have hybrid. Now this leads us to Robert Dahl, the famous American political scientist, and his criteria. Now, he had a model, a twofold model like Tocqueville. Here is called public contestation, competitiveness. This is contestation. It means competitive. Contestation means competition. So public, different groups competing with each other. To full to zero level. This is over there. This is a degree. None, low, high, right? So these things are switched. So remember, inclusiveness goes that way. See, it really that model should be flipped to follow the same. Like this is the more standard deviation. Now, what is this typology here? Full form. Polyarchy, different side, but the same thing. This is what high inclusiveness, high competitiveness, right? Competitive contestation. This is polyarchy. This is pluralism, hierarchy. Here is low contestation, hegemonic, inclusive hegemonic. This is closed hegemony. It's not inclusive hegemonic. It means very low. Hegemonic here means I'm the very low level amount of contestation. Only one group is going to be in charge and there's no competition for it. And then this is competitive, where there's low inclusiveness but it's competitive. These are competitive, different oligarchies competing with each other. This is the model there. Now, this is Tilley's famous division. It's government capacity versus democracy. And 0 means none. 1 means 100%, right? So it's a fork grid. So it's high capacity non-democratic, high capacity democratic, low capacity non-democratic, low capacity democratic. Again, the question of government, how capable is the government? How is it able to deliver service well? Is it doing effective on this thing, or is it not that effective? Capacity of government to deliver things. And then the question of this. And therefore, again, you can see this as a type Tilley's model is very useful in this regard in understanding this problem. Oh, that's good. Come on, nice. I hate this sometimes. Yeah. Now, I mention Huntington only because Huntington is so. Come on, nice. Huntington's model is a very interesting one because he says political participation, high, medium, low, and then there's civic versus Praetorian, means elite. And he says, okay, these are oligarchic, these are radical, this is mass. So traditional, this is the famous, this is the famous traditional, transitional, modern, right? Low participation is traditional, medium is transitional, high, modern. Therefore, civic models is you have organic versus, this is Whig means a transitional model, liberal model, and then participant model. And I think his old model is kind of weird because he says Soviet is high civic. This is an older version of the Soviet model in that sense. He's writing this in the 1960s. Here, oligarchical, radical, and as in Egypt, and mass is in Argentina. Now, Huntington's argue is this. This is the model of participation. Here is the high, low, low. This is participation, low, medium, high. Here is political institutionalism, high, low, high. And here is the two models, and here is the third model. It is this mean point is between this mean is here. Above this mean is civic, and below this mean is what? Is he calls Praetorian, and Praetorian means few. A small group of people who are controlling the system. So you have Praetorian systems in both low, medium, and high zones on level of participation versus the role of institutionalization. The more institutionalization, the more stage at the different stages, you have the higher level of civic. But notice civic. At high incitation, civic society actually has less fear. Notice this. Notice that. This is the more shocking thing. As participation goes high, what happens to this is the famous iron law of oligarchy taking place. The larger political institutionalization, more participation, right? The high levels of it. That with high levels of participation, fewer people. In other words, the scope of the civic decreases. And this is Easton's famous system model. We'll skip that. And here's the famous model that you take your political ideology test, right? That we have. This is the famous model. This is your libertarian. Your emphasis on individualism, emphasis on authority, emphasis on group, emphasis on freedom versus authority, right? So that you have the 4-scale model, and where you are in the scale in the model determines your ideology. These are that famous political tests, right? You take them and you ask these 500 questions, and you find where you are on the ideology scale. This is usually fascistic, monarchy, mob rule, libertarianism, and social democracy. Right, that's the famous criteria here. If I get it, this is it. Yeah, this is the thing. This is populism, hence fascism, right? Conservatism. This is economic. In other words, this is economic liberty, low, high. Low economic equality, economic liberty. Here is liberty and security, right? So therefore, libertarians are for liberty, high economic liberty, but low security, low on order. High on order is conservatism, but also high on economic freedom. And then last is low economics. They're low on economic equality, more for economic equality, and less on, but more on order. And here is liberals tend to be more favor on economic equality. This is the American model liberals. We call them socialists in Europe. Social democrats in Europe, and that's that. And the centrist is the moderate, where there's mixed ideology. So therefore, that's the ideology things. I thank you. Next week we'll look at the classical model, and please get your quizzes on your way out.